They called her shame, a burden, a disgrace. And then, with the wind howling like a hungry wolf, they threw her from the wagon and into the snow to die. 17-year-old Abigail Pewitt landed hard, the icy powder stealing the breath from her lungs. She looked up, her eyes pleading, as the wagon's lantern light grew smaller and smaller, a dying star in a universe of white. Her own mother, her own father, just left her. The first contraction hit her like a lightning strike, a brutal reminder of the secret she carried, the secret they were willing to kill her over. She was alone, freezing, and her babies were coming, but she wasn't entirely alone. From the swirling darkness, a shadow moved, a figure so large it seemed carved from the mountain itself, wrapped in the heavy fur of a buffalo. It knelt beside her, its face hidden in the gloom. Death, Abby thought. Death has come for me. But what neither of them knew was that death was already on its way. Men with rifles were closing in. Men paid a fortune to make sure the secret inside her never drew its first breath. And the hulking shadow who just found her, he had his own ghosts, and they were about to come roaring back to life. This isn't just a story about survival. It's a story about how the deepest wounds can lead to the fiercest strengths, and how sometimes the only way out is through the heart of the storm. The pain was a living thing. It clawed at Abby's insides, a vicious animal trying to tear its way out. She bit her lip until she tasted the warm, metallic tang of blood, trying to stifle the cry that wanted to rip from her throat. "Keep quiet, girl. You brought this shame on yourself." Her mother's words echoed in her head, colder than the wind that sliced through her threadbare dress. The twins inside her shifted, a rolling wave of agony that made the world go gray at the edges. She'd hidden it for so long, through the warm summer months and the crisp days of fall. But winter was cruel. Winter revealed everything. The jolting wagon hit another frozen rut, and this time, the scream escaped. It was thin and sharp, carried away by the storm's fury. "Samuel," her mother's voice cut through the wind. "She's making a spectacle." The wagon creaked to a halt. Heavy boots crunched in the snow, coming closer. Her father's face appeared at the back of the wagon, red with cold, his eyes blazing with a fury that scared her more than the blizzard. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed her arm, his fingers like iron bands, and yanked her toward the tailgate. "Pa, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The babies." "Ain't no babies of mine," he growled, the words a physical blow. With a single powerful shove, he pushed her out. She tumbled into a deep drift, the snow so cold it felt like fire against her skin. She looked up, desperate, and saw his face illuminated by the swaying lantern, a face she had loved her whole life, now twisted into a mask of stone. "You chose your path," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "Now walk it alone." He turned his back on her. The whip cracked, a sound like a rifle shot, and the wagon lurched forward, leaving her kneeling in the rapidly deepening snow. "Ma!" she cried out, a desperate final plea. But only the wind answered. The lantern dwindled, a tiny spark of hope, and then it was gone, swallowed by the swirling white darkness. Another contraction seized her, harder this time. She doubled over, gasping for air that felt like swallowing needles. She had to find shelter. Through the curtain of snow, she could hear the faint sound of rushing water. The creek. It had run alongside their trail for miles. If she could reach it, maybe it could lead her to help. She pushed herself to her feet, wrapping her arms around her belly. The wind was a physical force trying to tear her apart. One step, then another. The snow was already past her knees, heavy and unforgiving. Her feet were numb. Her fingers felt like brittle sticks of ice. The creek's voice seemed to taunt her, always just a little further away. A contraction, stronger than all the rest, dropped her back to her knees. She tried to get up again, but her legs refused to obey. This is it, she thought, a strange, dim calm settling over her. This is how it ends. Me and my babies, frozen in the mountain snow. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, turning to ice before they could even fall. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the lives inside her, the words stolen by the wind. "I'm so, so sorry." The snow swirled thicker, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. And through that white veil, a shape emerged. A massive shape, taller and broader than any man she had ever seen, wrapped in dark furs from head to toe. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ice. Was this some mountain beast, drawn by the scent of her weakness? But the figure didn't attack. It knelt beside her, the movement surprisingly gentle. Rough hands, warm despite the freezing air, touched her face. Through her frost-rimmed lashes, Abby made out a man's weathered features beneath a fur hood. His face was stern, etched with hard lines, but his eyes were not unkind. Without a word, he shrugged out of his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her shivering body. The fur was thick and heavy, still holding his body heat. The blessed warmth was so overwhelming that Abby nearly wept. Another contraction seized her, and a small whimper escaped her lips. The stranger's expression didn't change, but his arms, powerful as tree trunks, slipped under her with careful strength. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his broad chest. Through the coating of snow on his beard, Abby caught the scent of wood smoke and pine. He began to walk, his strides steady and purposeful. Each step sank deep into the drifts, but he never faltered, a living fortress against the storm. Abby huddled in the warm cocoon of the buffalo coat, fighting to stay conscious. She had no choice but to trust this silent giant. Her baby's lives depended on it. Time became a blur of wind and white and waves of pain. She drifted in and out of awareness, rousing only when the contractions gripped her. Then a warm glow pierced the storm's fury. A cabin, a small, solid cabin, materialized out of the snow, with lamplight spilling from its single window like a promise. The man shouldered open the heavy door, ducking his head to carry her inside. Heat washed over her frozen face, heat from a blazing hearth that roared with life. The cabin was small, a single room with a packed dirt floor and rough-hewn walls chinked with moss. A narrow bed occupied one corner. Furs and tools hung from the rafters. Everything about the place spoke of solitude. One cup, one plate, one chair pulled up to the fire. The stranger laid her gently on the bed, which was piled high with soft animal pelts. He turned away to stoke the fire, adding more logs until the flames leaped and danced. When he faced her again, Abby could finally see him clearly. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe in his late 30s, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair and beard were shot through with gray, and his hands were scarred and calloused from a lifetime of hard work. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a pale, piercing blue, the color of a winter sky, and they carried a weight of something she recognized. It looked like grief. A pain, stronger than any before, seized her. Abby curled around her belly, fighting to breathe. When she could finally speak, her voice was a ragged whisper. "The babies, they're coming." The man nodded once. He moved with a quiet, unnerving efficiency, gathering clean rags and heating a large kettle of water over the fire. Though he never spoke, his actions were sure and careful. He'd done this before, Abby realized. The thought gave her a small, fragile sliver of comfort. "I'm Abigail," she managed between contractions. "Abigail Pewitt." He paused in his preparations, regarding her with that steady, unreadable gaze. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice rumbled, deep and rough from disuse. "Silas. Silas Boone." It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to as the pains grew stronger, closer together, pulling her down into a world of pure sensation. The storm raged outside, but here, in this stranger's cabin, she had found an unexpected harbor. Silas worked quietly, laying out everything she would need. His movements were deliberate, almost gentle, a strange contrast to his imposing size. When he brought her a cup of hot, sweet tea, Abby caught a glimpse of something else in his face. It wasn't pity, which she had grown to despise. It was understanding. This man knew what it was to be alone. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting his pale eyes, "for not leaving me out there." His only response was a slight nod, but somehow it was enough. As the next contraction built, a massive, cresting wave, Abby drew strength from his steady presence. The lamplight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the cabin walls. The wind howled, but the fire blazed. For the first time since this nightmare began, Abby felt a tiny spark. It felt like hope. The hours bled together in a haze of firelight and agony. Silas was a rock, his quiet presence an anchor in the storm of her pain. He spoke little, offering only terse words of encouragement, but his hands were steady as he wiped her brow with a cool cloth, and his strength was a wall she could lean against. The blizzard shrieked outside, a furious beast trying to tear the little cabin from the mountainside. But inside, another battle was being waged. "I can't," Abby gasped, her strength failing, her body screaming in protest. "You can." Silas's voice was firm, cutting through her exhaustion. "You're stronger than you know. Now push." She bore down with a final, desperate cry that mingled with the wind's howl. And then, a new sound pierced the storm's roar. A thin, reedy wail so full of life, it made Silas's hands tremble. He worked quickly, his large fingers surprisingly nimble as he cleaned the squalling infant. "A girl," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He wrapped the baby in a warm fur and was about to hand her to Abby when Abby cried out again, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of shock and fear. "Wait," she gasped, her body arching. "There's another one." Silas didn't hesitate. He laid the first baby, a tiny girl with a shock of dark hair, in a makeshift nest of furs near the fire. Then he turned back to Abby, whose face had gone chalk white. "You can do this, Abigail," he said, his voice a low rumble of command. "Just a little more." 10 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, a second cry joined the first. Another girl, slightly smaller than her sister, but just as fierce in her protest at being brought into this cold, harsh world. Silas cleaned and wrapped her, too, then helped Abby sit up, propping her against a mountain of pelts. He placed a baby in each of her arms. Tears streamed down Abby's face as she cradled her daughters, her perfect, tiny daughters. She touched the first baby's cheek. "Ruth," she whispered, then the second. "And Mercy," her voice broke on the name. Silas busied himself, cleaning up with a quiet efficiency that gave her a moment of privacy. When he came back with a cup of hot broth, Abby was still weeping, but now they were tears of overwhelming joy. "They're perfect," she said, looking up at him, her eyes shining with a fierce, protective gratitude. I never knew I could love something so much, so fast." Silas helped her drink, then settled the babies more securely against her. "You should rest," he said. "But first, you need to tell me everything. Who did this to you? Who left you to die?" As the twins slept against her chest, their tiny breaths little puffs of warmth, Abby told him. Her voice was barely a whisper, recounting the story of Caleb Tate, the handsome son of the most powerful and ruthless rancher in 3 counties, Jeremiah Tate. "He was so charming," she said, stroking Ruth's dark hair. "He said all the right things. He promised we'd marry as soon as he told his father. He said he loved me." Her laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "But when I told him I was expecting, he changed. He said I was trying to trap him, that I'd probably been with other men." She took a shaky breath. "His father, Jeremiah, came to our farm. He offered my parents money to send me away, to hide the problem. Pa refused the money, but he said he wouldn't stand against the Tates either. He said I brought shame on them all." Mercy stirred, making a tiny mewing sound. Abby soothed her automatically, her touch gentle despite the raw pain in her voice. "The Tates don't know about the twins," she said, a new fear creeping into her tone. "If Jeremiah finds out, he's obsessed with his legacy, his bloodline. He'd take them. He would claim them as his heirs, and I would never ever see them again." Silas stood, moving to add another log to the stove. The firelight caught the hard, angry angles of his face. He turned back to her, his jaw set like granite. "They won't take them," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was filled with an iron certainty that seemed to shake the very walls of the cabin. "Not while I'm still breathing." Abby's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Why? Why are you helping us? You don't even know me." "I know enough, Ishram," he said, and he didn't elaborate. His expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at the sleeping babies. He moved to a small trunk in the corner and lifted out a worn leather Bible. He handled it with a reverence that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "My wife, Sarah," he said, his voice dropping so low she could barely hear it. She used to read from this every night, said it helped her feel less alone up here. He ran his thumb along the cracked spine, his gaze lost in a memory. Would you, would you mind if I read some now? Abby's throat tightened at the raw grief in his voice. I'd like that, she managed. He sat in the single chair, the lamplight casting his large frame in shadow. He found the page he was looking for and cleared his throat. Psalm 27, he began, his deep voice filling the quiet cabin. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? As he read, some of Abby's terror began to recede, replaced by the ancient words of refuge and hope. The twins slept peacefully. The storm outside seemed to quiet its rage. Wait for the Lord, Silas read, his voice gaining strength. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. He closed the book slowly. My Sarah always said that last part twice, to make sure it stuck. Abby wiped the tears from her cheeks. She sounds like she was very wise. She was, Silas said, returning the Bible to its trunk. He turned back, and his gaze fell on Mercy, who had kicked a tiny foot free from her blanket. As he gently tucked the fur back around her, he froze. His whole body went rigid. What is it? Abby asked, her fear returning in a cold rush. Silas didn't answer. He stared at the baby's foot, his face ashen in the firelight. With a trembling hand, he reached out and gently turned the infant's ankle. There, just above the heel, was a small, uniquely shaped birthmark, like a tiny, perfect crescent moon. Silas staggered back as if he'd been struck, his pale blue eyes wide with a look of disbelief and horror that chilled Abby to the bone. It can't be, he whispered, the words barely audible. It's not possible. He looked from the baby to Abby, and in his eyes she saw a ghost that had just risen from a 5-year-old grave. The air in the cabin grew thick and heavy. Silas stared at the crescent moon birthmark on Mercy's ankle, his face a mask of shock. The grief Abby had seen in his eyes before was now mingled with something else, something sharper, confusion, and maybe even fear. Silas, what is it? Abby pleaded, clutching the babies closer. You're scaring me. He seemed to shake himself, pulling a veil back over his emotions. The stern, unreadable mountain man was back. It's nothing, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Just tired. It's been a long night. But it wasn't nothing. Abby knew it. The way he looked at Mercy had changed. It was a look of profound, painful recognition, as if he were seeing a ghost in her daughter's tiny form. He avoided looking at the babies for the rest of the night, keeping himself busy by the fire, his back turned to her. The silence, which had once felt comforting, now felt menacing. The next morning he was gone before she woke. A fresh stack of firewood was piled by the stove, and a pot of water was heating, but the cabin felt unnervingly empty without his presence. He had taken his rifle and his snowshoes. He was checking his trap lines, she told herself. That's all. But a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. He didn't return until late afternoon, 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder. He moved with a new tension, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line around the cabin. We're low on flour and lamp oil, he announced without preamble, avoiding her gaze. I need to make a trip into Elk Hollow. I'll trade some furs. Now, Abby asked, startled. The storm just broke. Best to go while the weather hold, he said flatly. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. His urgency felt wrong. He wasn't just going for supplies. He was running from something, from what he'd seen on Mercy's ankle. The town of Elk Hollow was a rough collection of log buildings huddled in a narrow valley, its single street a muddy track of melted snow and horse manure. Silas moved through it with the quiet purpose of a man who wanted to be invisible. At Whitaker's Mercantile, he traded his furs for flour, salt, oil, and a small bag of coffee beans, a luxury he hadn't allowed himself in years. As the shopkeeper weighed out the flour, 2 men swaggered in, their spurs jingling on the wooden floor. They wore the colors of the Tate Ranch, their holsters tied low on their hips. They were loud, arrogant, and clearly looking for something. Ain't seen no strange women passing through, have you, Whitaker? one of them asked, his voice booming through the small store. Young girl, heavy set, brown hair. The shopkeeper shook his head nervously. Ain't seen nobody like that, Jed. The other man, leaner and meaner looking, laughed. Maybe the wolves got her. Good riddance. He slapped a piece of paper down on the counter. It was a crude, hand-drawn poster. Silas glanced at it out of the corner of his eye. His blood ran cold. It was a wanted poster. For Abby. But the words were pure venom. $50 reward for information leading to the whereabouts of Abigail Puett, the woman who tried to trap my son with lies. It was signed not by Jeremiah, but by Caleb Tate himself. This wasn't just a search. It was a public shaming, a cruel attempt to destroy her reputation completely. Caleb wasn't just a coward hiding behind his father. He was an active participant in the hunt. He wanted her found. He wanted her punished. Silas paid for his supplies, his face a stony mask, and left the store. He loaded his pack, his mind racing. He had to get back to the cabin. He had to warn Abby. He took the high trail, a more difficult but faster route. As he climbed, he noticed something that made the hair on his arms stand up. Tracks. Not the clumsy tracks of Tate's cowboys. These were different. They were made by someone who knew how to move through the mountains. Someone light on their feet, using the terrain for cover. Someone who was deliberately trying not to be seen. The tracks followed the ridge, heading directly toward his cabin. Someone else was on the mountain. Someone else was hunting Abby. Silas moved faster, his powerful legs eating up the miles. The sun was beginning to sink, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of orange and purple. As he neared his own territory, he saw it, tucked into the hollow of a snow-laden pine, almost invisible. A small fetish, carved from bone and tied with a strip of red leather. He stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. He knew that carving. He knew that knot. It was a marker, a symbol, a message. His brother was here, Elias. The younger brother he hadn't seen in 5 years. The brother who had once been his shadow, who had learned everything he knew about tracking and hunting from Silas himself. The brother who now worked as the lead tracker for Jeremiah Tate, and the brother who blamed Silas for his wife's death. The fetish was a taunt, a declaration. I'm here. I know where you live, and I'm coming for what's yours. The hunt was no longer just about Abby and the Tates. It had just become terrifyingly personal. Silas broke into a run, the bag of coffee beans forgotten, his only thought to get back to the cabin, to get back to the girls before his own blood found them first. He burst through the cabin door like a storm front, his face grim, his eyes wild. Abby jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. What is it? What happened? She asked, rushing to bar the door behind him. Pack a bag, he ordered, his voice tight and urgent. Just the essentials. Food, blankets, everything for the babies. We may have to leave. Leave? Why? Was it Tate's men? Worse, Silas said, pulling ammunition from a locked chest. My brother, Elias. He's working for Tate. He's here, on this mountain. The name meant nothing to Abby, but the look on Silas's face told her everything she needed to know. This was a danger beyond anything she had imagined. As she frantically packed, throwing diapers, dried meat, and the twins' few tiny garments into a sack, a soft knock came at the door. They both froze. Silas raised his rifle, motioning for her to get back, to hide with the babies. It is Naya, a calm female voice called from outside. I come with medicine for the mother. Silas hesitated, then slowly unbarred the door. A woman stood there, wrapped in thick furs, her face weathered and wise, her dark hair braided with silver. Snow dusted her shoulders. Her sharp eyes took in the scene at a glance. Silas with his rifle, Abby with a half-packed bag, the fear that hung in the air like smoke. The wind brings change, Naya said, stepping inside. Her gaze settled on Abby and the twins. I heard them crying on the mountain, the night they were born. You heard them? Abby asked, startled. The storm carried their voices, Nia said. I was gathering pine bark. The spirits told me to wait, that they were in good hands. She nodded toward Silas. He has helped my people before, when other white men would not. She looked at Silas, her expression serious. Your brother is here. My grandson saw his tracks by the frozen river. He left a marker on my trap line, Silas confirmed, his voice low and bitter. Nia's eyes held a deep, old sadness. I knew his heart was twisted, but I did not think it would come to this. She turned to Abby. I knew his wife, too, Sarah. The name hung in the air. Abby's breath hitched. What happened to her? Abby asked softly. Nia looked at Silas, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a short, sharp nod, a silent permission. The story they tell in the valley is that she died in childbirth, Nia said, her voice gentle. But that is not the whole truth. Your brother, Elias, he loved her too. But Sarah chose Silas. Elias could not accept it. He was there, at the birth. He was helping. The way Nia said the word helping made it sound like a curse. Things went wrong, terribly wrong. Elias has always blamed Silas, but the whispers among my people, the whispers say Elias's grief was not just for the woman he lost, but for the part he played in losing her. A cold dread seeped into Abby's bones. This was darker, more twisted than she could have imagined. Silas's past was not just one of grief, but of betrayal. He murdered her, Silas said, the words falling like stones into the silence. I can't prove it. I was half mad with grief myself, but I know it. In my soul, I know it. He let her die, and now he's here. He is not just a tracker, Nia warned, her eyes dark with urgency. He has his father's cunning and his mother's cruelty. He will not come at you head on. He sets traps, snares for the mind as well as the body. She looked around the small cabin, her gaze lingering on the single door, the unshuttered window. This place, this fortress, it is now a cage. He knows you are here, and he will use your love for them. She nodded toward the babies. To destroy you. The truth of her words hit them with the force of a physical blow. They were trapped, not just by the snow, but by an enemy who knew Silas better than anyone. An enemy fueled by a 5-year-old hatred and a guilty conscience. Suddenly, Silas lunged for the window, peering out into the twilight. What is it? Abby whispered. The fetish, Silas breathed, his knuckles white on the rifle stock. It's gone. Abby didn't understand. What does that mean? It means he's been here, Silas said, his voice a low growl. Right outside, while we were talking. It means he's watching us, right now. He scanned the dark, silent trees that crowded the cabin. The peaceful forest that had felt like a sanctuary now seemed menacing, filled with unseen eyes. Every shadow, every gust of wind felt like a threat. The game had begun, and they were the prey. The night was a torment. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every skittering sound on the roof was the footstep of an enemy. Sleep was impossible. Silas sat in his chair by the door, rifle across his lap, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside the window. Abby rocked the twins, humming softly, trying to project a calm she did not feel. They were prisoners in their own sanctuary. Morning came, gray and sullen. The tension in the cabin was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Silas moved with a coiled, dangerous energy, checking the perimeter, reinforcing the door, boarding up the lower half of the window. Around midday, they heard hoofbeats, not the frantic sound of a pursuit, but the slow, deliberate clopping of 2 horses approaching at a walk. Silas motioned Abby to the hidden corner, his face a grim mask. He took his position by the door, his rifle ready. Hello, the cabin, a voice called out. It was smooth, confident, familiar. Abby's blood ran cold. It was Caleb Tate. I know you're in there, Abigail, Caleb called. I've come to talk. That's all. I'm alone. Silas glanced at Abby, who shook her head violently. He didn't believe him for a second. Silas remained silent, his rifle steady. A second voice spoke, and this one sent a tremor of shock through Silas. He's with me, brother. Let us in. It's cold out here. Elias. Silas's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. It was a trap. A brazen, arrogant trap. He knew he shouldn't open the door. Every instinct screamed at him not to. But Elias knew him. He knew that Silas would never be seen as a coward who hid when challenged by his own blood. Slowly, reluctantly, Silas unbarred the door, but blocked the entrance with his body. Caleb Tate sat astride a fine black horse, looking every bit the wealthy rancher's son. Beside him, on a lean gray mare, was a man who was both a stranger and a mirror to Silas. He was leaner, darker, with the same pale blue eyes. But where Silas's held a quiet grief, Elias's glittered with a sharp, predatory intelligence. He smiled, a cold, thin slash in his bearded face. "Been a long time, Silas," Elias said, his voice soft, almost conversational. "Not long enough," Silas growled. "State your business and be gone." "My business is with the girl," Caleb said, swinging down from his horse. He ignored Silas, his eyes fixed on Abby, who was half hidden in the shadows. His face was a mask of false concern. "Abigail, my darling, I've been so worried. My father, he's a hard man. He made me put out that reward notice. But I've come to make it right. Give me my children. I'll take you all away from here. We can start a new life, just like we planned." "You're a liar." Abby's voice shook with fury as she stepped forward. "You called me a liar in front of the whole territory. You let your father drive my family away." "I had no choice," Caleb insisted, taking a step toward the door. "But I'm making a choice now. I'm choosing you. Us." While Caleb spun his web of lies, Elias dismounted and walked slowly around the cabin, his eyes taking in every detail. The new boards on the window, the height of the woodpile, the direction the smoke was blowing from the chimney. He was assessing, analyzing, looking for weaknesses. He stopped by the woodpile Silas had stacked against the wall. "You always did build a good woodpile," Elias said, his voice casual. "Solid, straight." He leaned against it, and then, as if he'd slipped, he stumbled, sending several logs tumbling to the ground. "Clumsy me," he said with his cold smile. But it wasn't clumsy. For a split second, as the logs fell away, Abby saw it. A loose floorboard at the base of the cabin wall, a flaw Silas must have missed in his haste. Elias's eyes flickered toward it for just a fraction of a second. He'd seen it. He knew. He was mapping out his attack. "Your answer, Abigail?" Caleb pressed, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "Will you come with me?" "Get off this mountain," Silas said, his voice a low threat. He took a step forward, his rifle now pointed not at Caleb, but directly at his brother's heart. "Both of you, now." Elias just smiled again. He held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Easy, brother. We're just talking." He turned to leave, then paused. "It's a shame about Sarah. If you'd only been a little faster getting the doctor, eh? But you were always a bit slow when it counted." The insult was designed to gut him, to throw him off balance. Silas's face went rigid, but he held his ground. He watched them mount their horses and ride away, their laughter echoing in the cold, clear air. They disappeared into the trees, leaving behind a silence that was more menacing than their words. Silas slammed the door and barred it, his chest heaving. He felt like a fool. He had let the enemy scout his defenses, let him plant seeds of doubt and poison in his home. He saw the loose board, Abby whispered, her face pale. "Elias." He saw it. Silas nodded, his eyes dark with fury. He knew. This wasn't a rescue mission from Caleb. It was a reconnaissance mission from Elias. He went to check the door, to make sure the bar was secure. And then he saw it. Stuck deep into the wood of the door frame, quivering slightly, was a long, slender throwing knife. The handle was wrapped in worn red leather. Elias's knife. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise of violence to come, and it was a message for Silas alone. "I can get this close whenever I want. You can't protect them." The mountain was no longer a refuge. It was a hunting ground, and Elias had just shown them how easily he could move in for the kill. The knife in the door changed everything. The game was no longer passive. The threat was no longer distant. Elias had been within arm's reach. The psychological toll was immense. Every shadow seemed to hold his lean, smiling form. Every gust of wind sounded like his soft, mocking voice. "We can't just wait for him to make the next move." Abby said that night, her voice filled with a new, hard resolve. The frightened girl was gone, replaced by a mother who would do anything to protect her children. "You have to teach me Teach me to shoot. Silas looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and nodded. He was done being the prey. For the next 2 days, the forest around the cabin echoed with the crack of a rifle. Silas was a harsh, demanding teacher. He made her hold the heavy weapon until her arms screamed in protest. He made her load and reload in the freezing cold until her fingers were numb. Faster, he would command. Don't think, just do. In a fight, you don't have time to think. Slowly, she got better. Her aim steadied. Her movements became more fluid. She learned to control her breathing, to squeeze the trigger instead of yanking it. She was a natural, her hands steady, her eyes clear. The fear was still there, but now it was cold and sharp, honed into a weapon. While she practiced, Silas sent a message. He carved a series of specific notches into a piece of birch bark, a code he and Nia had established years ago, and left it under a designated rock on the northern ridge. The message was simple and desperate. Find Brother Matthews, the preacher. Tell him to come. Tell him it's a matter of life and death. Nia's grandson, a boy of 15 named Little Hawk, was the one tasked with the dangerous mission. He was swift and knew the mountains like the back of his hand. But Elias was out there. It was a race against a hunter who never gave up. On the third day, as dusk was painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, Little Hawk returned. He was exhausted, his face scratched from running through thick undergrowth, but he was triumphant. He is coming, the boy panted, accepting a cup of water from Abby. He was 2 valleys over. I gave him the message. But I was followed. Elias? Silas asked, his body tensing. I think so, Little Hawk said, a shadow that moved like a wolf. I lost him in the Black Creek Pass, but he knows. He knows the preacher is coming. They didn't have much time. Elias would know the preacher's arrival meant trouble. He would try to stop it, or worse, he would accelerate his own plans. The next morning, an hour before dawn, a figure emerged from the trees. It was Brother Matthews, a tall, gaunt man with a kind face and a beard frosted with ice. He carried a heavy pack and looked weary from his journey. Nia's boy said it was urgent, the preacher said, gratefully accepting the hot coffee Silas handed him. His gentle eyes took in Abby and the sleeping twins without a hint of judgment. I came as fast as I could. We need your help, Reverend, Silas said. We need your testimony. Abby explained the situation, her voice low but steady. She told him about Caleb's promises, his betrayal, and his father's threats. I remember that day clearly, Brother Matthews said with a sad sigh. Caleb seemed so earnest. I truly believed he loved you. He reached into a waterproof pouch inside his coat. Jeremiah Tate has a long reach. I suspected he might try to erase what was done, so I took precautions. He pulled out 2 documents. The first was the marriage certificate, crisp and official. The second was a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper. What's that? Abby asked. It's a letter, the preacher said, handing it to her. Caleb asked me to deliver it to you the day before the wedding. I believe it is proof of his intentions in his own hand. Abby's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Caleb's familiar script flowed across the page. Words of love and promise that now felt like daggers to the heart. My dearest Abigail, it began. Tomorrow we begin our lives together. I don't care what my father says. My love for you is stronger than his ambition. We will raise our child in a house full of love, far from his shadow. The letter was undeniable. It was proof that he hadn't just been a boy caught in his father's web. He had made a promise, a vow, and had broken it in the most brutal way possible. This changes everything, Silas said, his voice grim. This wasn't just about protecting the babies anymore. It was about claiming Abby's rights, her name, her honor. As Abby refolded the letter, a tear splashing onto the page, a sound cut through the morning stillness, a long, mournful sound that echoed off the frozen peaks. A wolf howl, but it wasn't a wolf. Silas was at the window in an instant. It's Elias's signal, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He's calling the pack. He looked out at the valley below, his eyes narrowed. They're coming. Tate, Elias, all of them. And they're not coming to talk this time. The time for hiding was over. The time for practicing was done. The battle for the mountain, for their lives, for the future of Ruth and Mercy, was about to begin. The siege began not with a bang, but with a chilling silence. The wolf howl echoed and then faded, leaving a stillness that was heavier and more threatening than any sound. Silas, Abby, and Brother Matthews moved with a quiet, desperate urgency. Abby, the back window. You know your sight lines, Silas commanded. Reverend, you stay with the girls. Keep them low and quiet. Silas took the front door and the main window, his movements economical and precise. He had placed caches of ammunition at each station. The cabin, once a place of warmth and refuge, had become a fortress, a tiny island in a sea of encroaching violence. Through the gaps in the boarded windows, they could see them. 7 riders emerging from the tree line in the valley below. Jeremiah Tate was at their head, a grim patriarch on a massive black stallion. But it was the man beside him who commanded the real attention. Elias. He wasn't just riding with them, he was directing them, pointing, splitting them into 2 groups with sharp, efficient hand signals. He was using tactics Silas had taught him years ago, when they were boys hunting deer in these same mountains. He was using Silas's own knowledge against him. Suddenly, a flash of movement on the northern ridge caught Silas's eye. It was Nia, and she wasn't alone. Several Ute warriors were with her, shadows moving among the pines. They weren't armed for a full-scale battle, but they had bows, torches, and something more valuable, an intimate knowledge of the terrain. Elias's plan was brutally simple. One group, led by Tate, would create a direct assault on the front of the cabin, drawing their fire. The second group, led by Elias himself, would circle around the back, using the dense woods for cover, and breach the cabin from its weakest point, the loose floorboard he had discovered. As Tate's men began their slow advance, dismounting and using trees for cover, Nia and her warriors made their move. They didn't engage directly. Instead, they became ghosts in the woods. An arrow would thud into a tree just inches from a cowboy's head. A rock would crash down from a high ledge, sending snow and ice cascading down. A series of bird calls would echo from 3 different directions at once, creating the illusion of a much larger force. It was psychological warfare, designed to fray nerves and sow confusion. The first shot came from Tate's men, a bullet that slammed into the log wall near the front window, sending splinters flying. Silas didn't return fire. He was waiting, biding his time. Then from the back of the cabin, Abby saw him, Elias moving like a snake through the snow, his knife already in his hand. He was heading for the woodpile, for the loose floorboard. "Silas, he's at the back!" she yelled. Just as Silas turned, the front door exploded inward, kicked open by one of Tate's largest men. The cowboy charged in, his pistol raised. Silas didn't have time to aim his rifle. He used it as a club, swinging the heavy stock in a brutal arc that caught the man square in the chest, sending him staggering back out onto the porch. Another shot shattered the window by Abby's head. Glass sprayed across the room. She didn't flinch. She raised her rifle, found her target, controlled her breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. Outside, a man cried out and clutched his arm, dropping his weapon in the snow. She had done it. She had fought back. The cabin was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Bullets thudded into the walls. Outside, men were shouting, confused by the phantom attacks from the ridge and the unexpectedly fierce resistance from the cabin. During a brief lull in the shooting, as Tate's men reloaded, a new voice called out. It was Caleb. "Abigail! Silas! There's a white flag!" he shouted, stepping out from behind a large boulder. He was unarmed, his hands raised. "Father's gone crazy. He'll burn you out. I can help you. There's a game trail on the east side of the ridge. Elias doesn't know about it. I can lead you out, get you and the babies to safety." Silas stared at him, his rifle steady. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I don't want my children to die," Caleb cried, and for the first time he sounded genuinely terrified. "Please, it's your only chance. Follow me." Now, while they're regrouping, Abby looked at Silas, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Could he be telling the truth? Was this a desperate act of conscience from a man who had finally found his courage? Or was it the most cunning trap of all? The twins were crying now, their terrified wails cutting through the air. The smell of smoke was beginning to drift into the cabin. Tate was making good on his threat. They were starting a fire. They had to make a choice. Stay and burn, or trust the man who had already betrayed them once. "We have to go," Abby said, her voice resolute. "It's the only way." Silas looked from her determined face to Caleb's pleading one. He didn't trust him. Not for a second. But Abby was right. Staying meant certain death. "All right, Tate," Silas yelled. "We're coming. Lead the way." They gathered the babies and the preacher, grabbing the precious letters and the marriage certificate. With Silas covering their retreat, they scrambled out the back and into the trees, following Caleb toward the promised escape route. The game trail was narrow and steep, but it was hidden from the main battle. For a moment it seemed like Caleb had told the truth. Hope began to bloom in Abby's chest. They rounded a sharp bend, a cluster of massive, snow-covered boulders rising up before them. And then Caleb stopped. "I'm sorry, Abby," he whispered, not looking at her. "He gave me no choice." From the shadows behind the boulders, figures emerged. Jeremiah Tate, his face a mask of cold triumph, and Elias, his thin smile more terrible than any snarl. They had walked right into it, the most devastating betrayal of all. The escape route was an ambush. The forest was silent. The sounds of the firefight at the cabin seemed a world away. Here in the narrow pass, there was only the cold, the snow, and the triumphant faces of their enemies. "You really are a fool, Boone," Jeremiah Tate said, his rifle aimed squarely at Silas's chest. "Thinking you could stand against me." Elias stepped forward, his eyes, so like Silas's, glittering with a cold, hateful fire. "It's over, brother. You lose. You always do." He reached for Abby, his fingers closing around her arm like a vice. "No!" Abby cried, struggling against his grip, trying to shield the babies. But as Elias pulled her closer, Silas did something unexpected. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't plead. He smiled, a grim, tired smile. "You think this was my only plan, Elias?" he said, his voice quiet. "You taught me better than that." He raised his head and gave a sharp, piercing whistle, the signal of a mountain hawk. For a moment, nothing happened. Tate laughed, a harsh, ugly sound, bluffing to the very end. Then from the rocks above them, from the trees behind them, figures rose. Nia, and with her, 10 Ute warriors, their bows drawn, arrows aimed at the hearts of Tate's men. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted. The ambushers had been ambushed. Tate's face went slack with shock. His men looked around wildly, their confidence evaporating as they found themselves surrounded. But Elias was faster. He was always faster. Before anyone could react, he spun Abby around, pulling his long knife from its sheath and pressing the cold steel against her throat. He held her in front of him, a human shield, the terrified twins caught between them. "Drop your weapon," Elias snarled at Nia and her men. "All of you, or she dies right here." The standoff was absolute. A dozen arrows were aimed at him, but he knew they wouldn't risk hitting Abby. Silas's rifle was leveled, but he couldn't get a clear shot. "It's over, Silas," Elias repeated, his voice a venomous whisper in Abby's ear. "Just like it was with Sarah. You're always too slow to save the women you love." The name, the final taunt. It was the breaking point. Something in Silas shattered. The grief, the guilt, the suspicion he had carried for 5 long years finally erupted. "It wasn't me who was too slow, Elias," Silas said, his voice shaking with a terrible, contained rage. "It was you." Everyone froze. The words hung in the icy air. "What are you talking about?" Elias spat, his grip tightening on Abby. "Sarah," Silas said, his voice growing stronger, colder. "You didn't just blame me. You wanted me to blame myself, to live with the hell you created." He took a step forward, his eyes locked on his brother's. "You were in love with her. You were always in love with her. And when she chose me, you couldn't stand it." "You're insane," Elias hissed, but a flicker of panic crossed his face. "Am I?" Silas pressed on, the terrible truth pouring out of him. "You were there at the birth, helping. But the midwife told me later, she told me about the herbs you gave Sarah for the pain, herbs you learned about from the old woman in the swamp, herbs that can stop a woman's bleeding, or start it if the dose is wrong." Caleb stared, horrified. Jeremiah Tate looked from Silas to his trusted tracker, a dawning suspicion on his hard face. Sarah started bleeding. Silas's voice cracked, the memory as raw as an open wound. It wouldn't stop. The midwife didn't understand why. By the time I got back with the doctor, it was too late. You didn't just let her die, Elias. You murdered her. You killed the woman you claimed to love because she wouldn't be yours. The truth, stark and ugly, was finally out in the open. Elias's face crumpled. The cold confidence was gone, replaced by the wild, cornered look of an animal caught in a trap of its own making. His carefully constructed world of righteous anger had been built on a foundation of murder and lies, and it was all coming down. The revelation shattered him. His grip on Abby loosened for just a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. In the past 2 days, she hadn't just learned to shoot. Silas had taught her how to fight, how to use an attacker's weight against them. She stomped down hard on Elias's instep with her heel. As he grunted in pain, she drove her elbow back into his ribs with all her strength. He staggered, his breath leaving him in a whoosh. The knife clattered to the ground. Abby scrambled away, protecting the twins. The spell was broken. 2 of Naya's warriors leaped down from the rocks, tackling the stunned Elias and pinning him to the ground. Jeremiah Tate stared at the man who had been his right hand, his face a mask of utter disgust. Even for a man as ruthless as Tate, this was a line that had been crossed. This was a depth of evil he couldn't stomach. He looked at his son, Caleb, cowering and useless. He looked at the marriage certificate and the letter, which Brother Matthews was now holding out for him to see. He saw the truth, all of it. He saw the legal quagmire, the murder, the public disgrace. He saw that he had lost. He made a decision. He turned to his remaining men. It's over. He looked at Caleb, his eyes filled with a cold, dead light. You are no son of mine. You are weak and you are a coward. I am disowning you. You will not get 1 cent of my money, not 1 acre of my land. You are nothing to me. He then turned to Brother Matthews. Preacher, I assume you've brought the law with you. The preacher nodded. From further down the trail, the county sheriff and 2 deputies emerged, their own rifles ready. They had been the final contingency, waiting for the preacher's signal. Arrest that man, Tate said, pointing a shaking finger at Elias, for the murder of Sarah Boone. I'll testify. He then looked at Abby, his expression unreadable. The children, they are Tate's. They will be provided for. A trust will be established, but they will remain with their mother. It was over. Justice, swift and brutal, had finally come to the mountain. Elias was hauled to his feet, his face a mask of defeated rage. Caleb stood alone, disowned and disgraced, a ghost in the wreckage of his own lies. Jeremiah Tate, a proud man broken by the evil he had employed and the weakness he had bred, mounted his horse and rode away without another word. A lonely, defeated king leaving his shattered kingdom. The snow began to fall again, soft, gentle flakes that covered the tracks of the battle, blanketing the mountain in a fresh layer of white. In the quiet that followed, Silas, Abby, and the twins, protected by Nia and the preacher, walked back to the cabin. The fire Tate's men had set had been small, more of a scare tactic than a real threat, and Nia's people had already extinguished it. The cabin was scarred, the door splintered, a window shattered, but it was still standing. It was still home. Inside, the warmth from the stove welcomed them. Brother Matthews helped Abby get the twins settled into their cradle, their innocent faces peaceful in sleep. They had slept through the final confrontation, protected from the ugliness of the world. Nia quietly placed a bundle of healing herbs on the table. For the spirit as well as the body, she said softly. She touched Abby's shoulder. You are a warrior, little rabbit. You fought for your young. With a nod to Silas, she and her people slipped back into the forest, their work done. Only the 3 of them remained, surrounded by a profound and peaceful silence. Abby sank into the rocking chair, her body aching, her spirit weary but whole. Silas stood by the fire, staring into the flames, the weight of 5 years of misplaced guilt finally lifting from his shoulders. He turned to her, his pale blue eyes clear for the first time since she'd met him. The ghosts were gone. Abigail, he began, his voice thick with emotion. He crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were rough, calloused hands, but they were gentle. When I found you in the snow, I was a dead man walking. My heart was buried with Sarah. I thought I was just doing what was right, helping someone in need. But you and Ruth and Mercy, you brought me back to life. Tears streamed down Abby's cheeks. I know this is all sudden, he continued, his voice low and earnest. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Abigail Puitt. I love your strength, your courage, your heart. I already love those little girls as if they were my own. Let me be a father to them. Let me be a husband to you. Let us build a family here, on this mountain, a family built not on lies and shame, but on truth and love. Yes, Abby whispered, her voice breaking. Oh, Silas. Yes. He rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if he would never let go. It was not the desperate embrace of two survivors clinging to each other, but the steady, certain embrace of two people who had found their way home. Outside, the snow fell, cleansing the world, offering a new beginning. The splintered door could be mended. The broken window could be replaced. The scars would remain, but they would be a reminder not of what was lost, but of what had been won. Right here in this small cabin on a lonely mountain, a new family was born, forged in the heart of a blizzard and tempered in the fires of betrayal. They were survivors. They were warriors. They were home. If you believe that courage can be found in the darkest of places and that a family is built by love, not by blood, then hit that subscribe button. Because stories like these are a reminder that even after the most brutal storm, the sun will eventually shine again.